Well, hi everyone, and thanks for joining us. Can everybody hear me? Cool. Well, I just want to thank you all for joining us, and thank you all, along with a few hundred other people, for making the premiere so successful. I'm here today with, what do we have with us here today? We have Sylvie Pelche, the producer and co-writer, and the lovely and talented Randy Kane. We have had a few people post questions to us, and I'd be happy if they sent us questions by email. And I would be happy if you have questions to just answer them in the chat. Sylvie's following it along, and we'll answer your questions in the order they come in and with time permitting. So, where should I begin, Randy?
At the beginning, right? I don't know. Do anybody have any questions that they would like to ask?
Well, one question that a lot of people wanted to know why you wanted to do a documentary about cannabis.
Why did I want to do a doc about cannabis? Well, I've always been a social user. I hate the term recreational cannabis. I don't drink and smoke recreationally. I go fishing recreationally. But I've been a user for many years, and going back to 2015 when I first heard Trudeau's campaign to legalize cannabis, I brought it up with Sylvie. We had a chat and went, this would be a great subject for a doc. And originally it was to go across Canada and interview people pre and then post legalization to see what their concerns were, what their hopes and dreams for legalization might look like, and then go back and talk to those people again after legalization to see how well or how poorly legalization actually transpired. Then in the process of researching the show, we decided to go to the Netherlands, Israel, Portugal, and of course we had to go to the United States because they had been legalizing state by state long before us. And one of the other reasons was that I found there was a lot of misconception, a lot of stigma, and a lot of taboo dating back to the early 1900s. I think that it was probably things like, what the hell was that movie called that we try not to watch anymore? Reefer Madness. And the political landscape at the time that started all of this. And it's just been going, perpetuating itself for many years. And as I started researching and speaking with people, I realized that that is probably still the biggest stumbling block when it comes to the legalization, the acceptance of it. We accept tobacco, we accept alcohol, we accept all kinds of narcotics, we accept drug addiction, but we can't seem to get our heads around this pungent little leafy vegetable.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Greg, we have another question
Okay.
already. So, we don't have to make super long answers. So we can cover as many as possible. So we have from Linda, where are we at with the gray zone producers, retailers in Canada today? And maybe Randy can answer that.
Well, where are we right now? No, I mean, it's a tremendous stumbling block. The way this has been rolled out, the legislation, I think, has been a failing to all Canadians. We're also remarkably hopeful that this was going to lead to something new, would be something that would solve a lot of old issues and mend a lot of old wounds. It would seem that right now we're watching all of the LPs, they're stumbling and going broke. I don't know if there's going to be any room looking forward for this to mature into an industry. It almost looks like it's on the verge of collapse. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe at that point there might be appropriate for those that were developing the policies to go out and maybe speak to people who have been involved in the industry for a great many years. One of the participants that we have right now, the people from Weeds, they've been left out of this moving forward, as so many have. I think they'd be a really good voice in terms of trying to find out how to move forward. So your question, although I wish I could answer it better, but I do think that we're really at this a real stumbling block. There seems to be a belief that this new guard can handle it better than the old guard. I think the failings of it are going to be, sort of something that, as time moves on, right now, of course, we're in the midst of this health crisis. So, but I do believe that following this, they're going to have to look at ways of examining and rebuilding the economy, and this is one aspect of it.
Well, one thing that is positive for the industry is that sort of province by province, they've declared it a necessity. So hopefully it will help reduce harm and the stresses of what we're all going through right now with this pandemic. What else you got there, Sylvie?
Well, I've got another question from Linda. Thanks, Linda. It's, are there stats in Canada as to whether there are more or less marijuana users since legalization? I can answer that.
Go for it.
Actually, Statistics Canada has been keeping track of marijuana consumption since 2017, before legalization. And it's really cool. They have quarterly reports on consumption by age group and by gender and by provinces, and it's available to anyone who just wants to go and have a look on their website. And consumption really has increased for the older generation, for people who are like in the 60s and older. Young people are pretty much at the same level, and it's pretty similar also for the other age groups, but where there's been the most marked increase has been with the older people. And I think it has a lot to do probably with people discovering CBD and how it can help with all the aches and pains of aging.
Yeah, there was one interview clip with Ricardo Baca, who was now runs Grassland, who worked for the Denver Post. In the documentary, quoted that they anticipated in Colorado anyways, after legalization, that there would be a large uptick in consumption in general, but in youth consumption especially. And it hovered around normal, and it's actually dropped a little bit. I love the quote in the show where he says that weed's not as cool as it used to be. But those are interesting stats to see how once Canada comes out of the closet, to see what actual consumption looks like. What else you got there, Sylvie?
I've got well, I think we've got some different questions, but do you think that maybe, well, I'm not sure. I don't have any specific questions from you guys that have joined us, so we just had prep questions that the media had asked us when we released the French version of the documentary. And we were asked what kind of things that we discovered that surprised us the most. Greg, do you want to talk about that? Oh, I got a new one. I got Ray here. If you want, maybe.
What? I don't know really what were the biggest surprises. There were lots of them. I think some of the most interesting surprises came from Raphael Mishloon in Israel. to discover that there were so many different cannabinoids in cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. I know it's rather technical for an online chat, but it started me understanding why we all react differently. You and I could sit down and smoke the same joint, and I could get a buzz, and you could freak out. Why some people are treat pain with CBD, and some find pain treatment works best with THC. So I think that was one of my larger surprises. I think one of the stupid ones was, since the 70s, I always thought that pot was legal in Amsterdam. And I never much thought about it until we started researching and looking for people to talk to there, and realized that there's a misconception around the world that it is legal when it actually is a felony in all of Holland. So.
I have another question from Ray,
Okay.
and it is, how do you get the black market consumers to transition over to the legal market? They would be the best customers and heavy users. Maybe, Randy, you have some suggestions about that, some thoughts on that.
Getting people to come back from that side. Well, I think right now, I mean, let's say at least in BC, it's access. We're having a terrible time in trying to find places for people to access legally. And then once again, of course, the prices are too outrageous. You know, there's been heavy taxation. And once again, going back to the question, I think it was Linda that asked earlier about, you know, how are we progressing? Well, I think this is another tremendous stumbling block, is that they went in and figured that there was other changes that ought to take place. Prices could go higher. The consumer would accept that. Taxation. So I do think that that's, you know, the real stumbling block in trying to bring people over. One of the probably more telling points is when cannabis was first legalized in Canada, what they found was there were many people who wanted to be able to purchase legally and were seeking access through legal stores. They found with new users is that 60 to 70% were willing to go to these stores rather than seek out a dealer or maybe a friend that they knew. They wanted to go legal. So that was wonderful. But now what they found is because people can't actually go and access it through a legal outlet, many of these people now have gone and are seeking other. So I do think the program itself has really undermined itself in terms of inviting people in. I can speak for myself and many of us. We were all quite excited with the idea of it becoming legal. We did understand that there might be some sort of a sin tax that would be associated with it, and we're probably all willing to at least say, okay, well, you know, it's all over now, and Canada's going to unify itself, and neighbors aren't going to be afraid. And anyway, that all kind of fell to the side. So I think the enthusiasm that was initially there for us as Canadians has fallen away. It's sad, actually, that has happened, because I do think it was that level of enthusiasm that really could have taken this forward. So until they can fix this program, and that's really what it is, it's quite broken right now, I don't think it's going to improve anywhere in the near future.
I saw that BC has some kind of a commission to help with the transition of the people who used to be in the gray market. Do you know anything about it? I just know it exists.
Yeah, that's something that the provincial government BC provincial government has decided to step up to, and it was $500,000, $500,000, which is a very, very small amount of money in trying to bring, you know, sort of people over to that side. You know, it's not enough money. It's as though, and I think in the documentary it was very telling listening to Boris St. Maurice when he said is that they really didn't want to legalize this. They just had no choice. And so I heard those words, and it actually was a bit chilling when I see the policies themselves, that in fact they do really reflect that the policies themselves were poorly brought out and not supported, not believed in. And once again, we could continue to talk about the failings of this program that's come out, and I think these are just more of the indicators.
I have
Yeah, I find that I find it really disappointing to see how, it started out of the box with all the big players, all the LPs that have been growing in numbers. I think when we started researching back in 2015, there were less than 20 large legal producers, LPs. And by the time we finished filming last summer, there was well over 140 of them. And one of the other surprises I found after digging through this was what exactly the black market was. And everybody from Don Briere to Watermelon and Randy and all around the world, actually, I discovered that the black market is another propaganda piece for government. It makes good news, it makes good politics for them to describe the black market as being organized crime. And as John Conroy said, organized crime used to be five people or more, and the federal government reduced that to 3. Like he said, maybe they were having a hard time finding groups of 5 or more. But the black market was a majority of actual farmers, people who loved growing, craft growers, and there was always this promise on the sideline that they would be included. And I've been speaking to many of them who were trying to transition and wanted to talk to me in the documentary and weren't able to, and I've watched them since 2018 struggling to try and bring their products to market, going millions of dollars in debt. And I think the federal government and the provinces have really dropped the ball in moving that forward. Like Randy said, people who, even users who are afraid to go to the black market. They don't want to go to a street corner. They are afraid that they'll be sold some, inferior product, or they'll be pushed into some other kind of drug. Want to buy it legally, and they're really dropping the ball. Like, I had interviewed Randy last summer about his licensing. I know that Don and Carol are going through the same thing, just trying to get back on their feet. And it's really disappointing when you look at how many of these LPs now are just dropping the ball, closing up shop. They've got too much product because the feds and the provinces and the municipalities just aren't keeping up.
Okay, I've got 2 questions. This one's from Chad. Congrats on the doc, Greg and Sylvie. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I was curious to know more about what people told you about their shifting views. In the doc, you mentioned that one member of the family put people in prison for pot. Did you hear a lot of stories from people about their perspectives opening? Yes, I agreed. That was a very amazing part of the story. So people changing their minds, like Joanne Prévost, for example. Well,
Yeah.
Joanne Prévost, the grandmother who was married to a cop, actually was, when we went there, she was against legalization for recreational use. She wanted it to be only for medical use. And, that was kind of interesting, because she did have that stigma and that attitude, which she felt was a problem for her because she was a medical consumer, and she really wanted to be considered to be a completely different person than the social user. So she didn't really change her views.
We also had a friend whose husband serves in the Canadian military, kind of like any other policing force. To him, it was taboo. It's always been illegal. And even after legalization, he didn't really think about it as he would, smoking a cigar or having a drink. And after watching a preview of a rough cut of our show, back in December, he and his wife decided to try some. Their children had smoked and they were totally against it. And he had served in Afghanistan and Iraq and had been suffering from PTSD since those days. Sleeps, sleeps very lightly, has very difficult time sleeping. And after smoking his first joint, he said he had the best night's sleep he had had since he was a kid. And those kinds of stories are popping up during the research and filming of the production. And since yesterday, we've been getting emails and stories from all kinds of people who were enlightened by the show, telling us they want their, a friend of ours wants to share it with his 80-year-old father. Another friend says his sister, who's in her 70s, is using CBD for or an arthritic knee, but she's afraid to talk to her friends about it because it's still taboo. So that was, I think, the ultimate goal for the documentary, was to present all sides of this story and get people talking about it, get it out of the frickin' closet and make it more acceptable and accessible.
So I have a question from Nicole. Were you always planning on premiering the documentary online, or was that a result of the current COVID-19 situation? How would you have done it differently if the current pandemic was not a reality? I'll take it.
Okay.
Actually, we always planned to do it online because we wanted to reach all of Canada. And if we had done a live event, it would have been only people in BC. This also allows us to record the event in a very easy way, and the playback of this Q&A will be available after. So we just feel like nowadays that online sessions like this are just a great way to go and to reach all kinds of people.
I should also let everybody know that we were licensed. We pitched this idea to Radio Canada, the French CBC. We pitched it to English and French broadcasters across the country. Most people said, nah, don't want a show about weed. That's news. It's not a documentary. So the first window, as we call it, is a documentary called Legalization Cannabis. It's the same show, but in French. And that was broadcast at the end of March on Radio Canada, and it's now on their streaming service called EC2.TV. And it'll be aired again nationally on RDI and the CBC network around the anniversary of legalization in October sometime. And then because we didn't get a license, Sylvie and I was very passionate about it, and we figured out ways to bootstrap an English version. And like Sylvie said, doing it online meant that we could not just premiere it nationally, but global. Anyone around the world could tune in and watch it. We're not subject through YouTube to the same geo-blocking that we would be if it was done through a broadcaster.
Tony asks, what is the next step for this video in the discourse that it should open? Well, that's why we started the YouTube channel, because we have recorded like about 100 hours of interviews everywhere, and we made a 52-minute documentary with it. So we feel that there's a lot more material that is worthy of sharing. Some people we talked to are not even in the documentary at all. So we really feel like they gave us that time, and what they had to tell was actually very interesting and very valuable. And we're going to be putting on YouTube those interviews over the next little while. So that's really kind of like the part 2 of the documentary, if you want, that we're going to do. And we're also going to do new material as we go along, and as people tell us they're more interested in certain aspect of the whole cannabis question.
A couple of examples of that are one of the biggest challenges for me with this documentary was trying to find a medical practitioner, an actual doctor to talk to us on camera. And I went all across Canada to provincial colleges, the Canadian College, and I couldn't find any doctor to talk to me. I had my own prescription or my own license to use CBD for stress and anxiety. And the doctor who, quote unquote, prescribed to me agreed to be on camera. I filmed her for an hour and a half, and the next morning I got a phone call from her saying, I can't do this. I'm afraid of the ramifications. When I sent her a link to the finished documentary, she told me that she's now living in London and has found her voice and is now advocating on the use of particularly CBD for medicinal purposes. She spoke at the United Nations, and she's working with colleges and physicians in London. So I'll be able to now use the interview I had with her. I'd love to go back and have another chat with John Conroy about how the legalization has actually rolled out, and talk to him a little bit about what you can grow at home. Like, I was told when it was legalized that every Canadian could grow 4 plants, but it's not really the case. It's 4 plants per household. So there's a lot of details, again, that aren't being talked about in the media, and I'm going to be slicing and dicing a lot of the content that we have and putting it into more palatable chunks over the next weeks and months on the channel. We talked to amazing people like Bruce Alexander, who's been working on the downtown east side for 40 years. Talked to us about addiction. I spoke at length with Watermelon, who's an incredibly hilarious character and had a lot of interesting things to say about the use, as well as edibles, which we weren't able to stick in the show. So we've got tons of great characters that I hope to put online, and lots of new interviews I want to do to fill in the gaps.
Okay, I've got a few questions lined up. Linda is asking, for people who have past possession convictions, where's Canada at with giving them pardon? Can they be pardoned? Are there activists working on that? I'm wondering if Randy...
Yeah. Actually, recently legislation has come in that would give people a pardon. The challenge with a pardon, though, is it still stays within the record. I think we would really like to see these completely struck. But there is a way of making application and having that removed. My understanding is it's fairly basic in which to do it. But once again, like I say, I think it's only a half measure, given that these laws themselves were built upon fallacies and they were very harmful and left a lot of destruction in their wake. I would like to believe that the best hand offered would be one that would try to correct the wrongs of the past, not somehow put them over to the side and leave them to be somewhat indelible. But once again, we're moving in that direction. I'd like to believe that over time things will continue to improve.
Continuation of Linda's question. I've heard of ex-judges and cops who were anti-marijuana who are now on boards of big marijuana companies. That was, I guess you meant true or false? The answer is true.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, sadly it is true, and it kind of goes back to something I was saying at the beginning, is that those that championed this and worked so hard to change the laws, and not just simply because we wanted to smoke cannabis or we wanted the world to smoke cannabis. It was really, we saw it as a human rights issue. And we fought diligently, and we exercised, I think, a lot of positive ideals and to move it along. Now, regrettably, once again, so many of us that fought in those areas have been locked out, where those that were the prohibitionists, they were able to continue to hold on to their territory. But like I say, is that interestingly, and maybe regrettably for them, they're failing terribly, not just that they're implementing the policies, but as any business interests. They never cared about marijuana or cannabis. They never cared about cannabis users. All they did was just come up to the trough when there was one to feed at. You know, I think that many of them are going to now feel the reckoning of this. But I do look at a few of them. Fantino from Ontario. There's an individual that all of a sudden came forward and said that he was going to help with medicinal use, and yet equated cannabis users or suppliers to murderers and being unethical and just detriment to communities. So it is it's quite enlightening, I think, to watch what happened. It was just a money grab, but apparently there's no more money to grab.
Next question from Chad. What do you feel are the main reasons people are hesitant to talk about cannabis? Is it a generation issue? Maybe Randy is a good person to answer that.
Wow. Yeah, well, that's an interesting topic, and this is something that, you know, I talked with Greg and Sylvia about, and I think it sort of at the heart of their documentary, it has a lot to do with the propaganda, the allegations or insinuations about character of individuals that use it, and this is really, I would say, is the dark underbelly of what prohibition was about. You know, just by legalizing it didn't remove a lot of these stigmas, the terrible things that have been said about people over the years. Like I say, the propaganda. In order to be able to go after a group of individuals, it's important, in fact, it's vital, to demonize them so that you can gain the support of the populace when you do go after them. Well, this is what they did. They demonized the hell out of us. They took apart families, they seized children, they destroyed careers. I mean, my God, arrested people, traumatized them. And this is something that I would really like to believe that our government, in coming forward and legalizing it, they would have explained why. Is that in fact, the truth bore out. You know, we have a government right now that talks about everything being science-based. Well, wouldn't this be an important thing at this moment when they're bringing forward new policies in terms of cannabis, is to actually speak about the science, to acknowledge that where we came from in the past was poorly guided, was actually in fact wrong, and we've come to know better. I think those admissions would go a long ways in terms of mending some of the past. I don't think we can correct it all, but being a Canadian, you know, it never hurts to say I'm sorry, and that would be a nice thing to see happen.
Next question. You may not have an answer for this yet. This is from Nicole. But what sort of impacts do you think COVID-19 has had on marijuana usage? To the best of your knowledge, would you say usage has gone up or down as a result?
Well, I would say it will likely go up, judging by the stats that are cropping up about alcohol consumption. The fact that in so many places, cannabis as well as liquor stores have been considered essential services, and I tend to agree with that. And people who are, you know, at home, unable to work, and freaked out, need something to calm the hell down. And weed is a better alternative to booze.
Well, it's also less likely to lead to domestic violence, which is one of the big problems when people are stressed out and drinking too much.
That's very true.
The next question is we have Jim. We have a clarification from Weeds. For the question about the pardons are only for simple possession. If you have trafficking, no pardon is available.
Right, yes.
And that is a very good point.
Right, and what is the legal limit now? You're allowed to possess 30 grams, so about an ounce. So the pardons are only for convictions of an ounce or less. Anything More than that, in possession would have been considered trafficking, and I don't think any of those people are going to get off. That's a good question for John Conroy, who I don't think is with us anymore.
No. From Jim here, we have a question from Jim. Thank you for your leadership in driving forward this documentary, Greg and Sylvie. Is it possible for the original cannabis community to lead the reboot of the Canadian economy? And if yes, how? Now, I'm just going to jump in because already we had Weeds answer that question. So I'm going to read their reply and then maybe we can have Randy add on to that. At Jim, give the pioneers and good operators a GST and PST number and let us collect huge tax dollars that can go directly to our communities. I think they're going to need tax dollars the way they're spending these days. That's
very true. And Don had talked about that in the documentary. I mean, he ran a black/gray market operation for many years, but he operated it like a regular business. As suppliers had to, pay their taxes and have a legit address and phone number. He paid his staff well, I've talked to a lot of business people, retailers around who were in the gray market, who were doing a damn good job at bringing up awareness and running a legitimate business, and they've been shut out. Carol told me that Don is still waiting, been 14 months now, and he has not been able to get licensed to sell retail. Randy was in the same situation. He's gone through 2 levels of government, and the municipalities are preventing him from moving forward.
Yeah, maybe Randy wants to add on that.
I think that, in theory, that would be the best way to proceed, because those are the people who have been in the business for decades. They understand it, and they're being shut out. So.
Randy, do you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I think that, really you're hitting on it. And of course, listening to our friends from Weeds, is that there were a lot of people who had tremendous expertise. We've been around this industry for a long time. We understood the consumer. We'd already established a price. I mean, these are things, I run a business outside of cannabis, and really what you're trying to do in terms of selling a product is try to find that sweet spot. You have to serve your consumer, whether that's for Rice Krispies or coffee or cannabis. And that's something that, many of us within the industry, we had that expertise. I think it would have been very beneficial, once again, in moving these new policies forward, if they would have taken people from within the industry and brought them in and allowed us to become supportive, to hear our voices. But once again, I say the belief was that they could do it, bigger, badder, and better. So, but here we sit, is that it's collapsing in and of itself. My hope would be, is moving forward and talking about sort of the COVID thing. This would be a great opportunity to employ people. Many of these businesses, of course, were all community oriented. I did a presentation to the Chamber of Commerce a couple of months ago about small businesses, local small businesses. And a recent study had shown that for local small businesses, we leave 65% of our revenue within the community. That's 65 cents out of every dollar that comes into our businesses stays in the community. Or if you get multinationals, they leave about 15%, and that's 15 cents out of every dollar. So looking forward, I think this is why even now we have the federal government that's stepping in and looking at giving no interest loans to small businesses. They've come to understand how vital we are to the economy, not just in the past, but now and well into the future. So I do like to believe that maybe this would be an opportunity. I'm going to advance this in terms of the city and the township that I live in to help them understand that moving forward out of COVID, this would be a wonderful opportunity to employ people like any other business. But here's another one that we haven't had. So, I think it could be to our betterment, very clearly.
Tony says, I'm guessing that part of the process, the problems of easing the process of legalization and acceptance is distinguishing between the high and the health, i.e. THC versus CBD. How can this distinction be clarified? And then he says, I also suspect that this is a generational difference.
I'll take that first and then toss it over to Randy. One of the misconceptions is that CBD is the medicinal cannabinoid and THC is not. And going back to what I mentioned about the endocannabinoid system that I learned from Raphael Michelin, every one of us reacts differently. Some people treat pain with CBD, some treat pain with THC. And in fact, I believe that most of the medicinal cannabis industry is based around THC products. But that's where the conversation needs to be broken. Legalization needs to open up opportunities for research into all kinds of uses for medicinal cannabis. So part of it is educating people, distinguishing or just educating them about the two principal cannabinoids that we talk about most of the time. Do you have anything to add to that, Randy?
Yeah, I think this actually really highlights the whole notion when I talk about the propaganda, about the misperceptions, misconceptions, so that now all of a sudden we have sort of the two brothers, the CBD, which is the good one, and the THC, that's the bad brother. And in fact, either one of them are bad in any regard. We really have to be honest with ourselves and come to understand that these products themselves, used responsibly, used whether it's medicinally or whether it's used in the spiritual sense or recreational sense, is not driven by any sort of level of madness. It's something that we do need to understand, that the propaganda is going to influence how people respond to it. I've seen, working with medicinal users and their first experience with something where maybe they're going to get high, there can be a bit of a panic that goes along with it. They've been led to believe, whether it's through Reefer Madness or other sort of publications, that somehow all hell is going to break loose. This is a common barrier that we face in helping people that are looking to use it medicinally. They often starts up by saying, hey, look, I just don't want to get high. And we have to navigate their way through that and help them understand it, and once they have actually experienced the use of cannabis and they get some little something from it, the so-called high, it's quite amusing to watch, a senior citizen come in and go, okay, so that was it? And you go, yeah, that's pretty much about it. It's not as, it's pretty much sensationalized by the media that there's going to be Reefer Madness. The guy playing the piano and all the rest of it. These are very, extreme exaggerations that were intended to cause fear. And then, of course, because of that, we'd have our law enforcement that would come forward and say, well, we will alleviate that fear. So I'd like to believe that in the future, once we can get rid of some of the anxieties surrounding and get rid of sort of the myths surrounding this, that people come to understand that this medicine can be utilized whether it has THC in it or not. CBDs can be very useful for many things, but they're coming to also understand something called the entourage effect, that in fact THC and CBD work much better together. They operate in sort of a catalytic fashion. Even the documentary speaks about this as, one being sort of antipsychotic and the other one maybe have some kind of a psychotic component within it. So as you can see, having them together in that entourage effect would be best. We witness this, quite often in terms of medical application. CBDs are okay for low-level pain, exercise pain, something that's a bit more chronic. But when you're dealing with severe pain management or other things, it does not appear that CBD gives a full measure of relief as you would have if you have a combined product.
I'd also add that to Tony's question where he says that he suspects it's a generational issue. And over the course of making the show, I was rather surprised to see the greatest majority of medicinal users are 60 plus. Those are also the people who grew up most entrenched in prohibition and the taboo. They were told not to have sex before marriage. They were told not to smoke pot. Whereas youth are more accepting and willing to talk about stuff like that. So they've been hiding it from their parents, and their parents are the ones who really do have to get in the loop and realize that they were being fed a crock of shit for decades. So.
Yeah, and there isn't just THC and CBD, like Weeds is pointing out. There are many great cannabinoids that nobody talks about too, that are just basically not known. A lot of research is still required to be done.
Exactly. Raphael in Israel was talking in the neighborhood of 80 cannabinoids. 80 endocannabinoids that they've identified in the human brain, and I think it's over 100 cannabinoids in the plant themselves. And as Randy mentioned, the entourage effect not only is between CBD and THC, but it's also with a host of other things like terpenes that we really don't understand how they interact with one another and how each and every one of us, our brains react to as well.
And Tony says in the 60s, we hid it from our parents too. Yeah, and the people who hid in the 60s are now the ones who are consuming it the more. That's where the biggest increase is.
And a lot of them are hiding it from their kids.
Yeah. I have a question from Kate, which was, how is cannabis being used to treat arthritis, joint pain, and alcoholism? So do you want to talk a bit about that, Randy, since you are founder of Relief?
Yeah, so in terms of, medicinal application, if you're talking about arthritis, nerve pain, nerve issues like that, for neuropathy, it's very, very useful. But as we were talking earlier, though, about all of the different compounds, this is probably a very large part of using it medicinally, is to have somebody take you through, help you understand the differences between strains. We often hear this, there's variances, and the best way I could probably equate it would be as if you're taking a pain reliever. There's a variety of different ones, and your physician would guide you through and question you, does this one work, and how well did it work, and you're seeking you have some goals. And so are you able to fulfill your goals? And so you go back to your physician after a couple of weeks, he tweaks it a little bit, maybe gives you something different. The very same thing is true with using cannabis. Is having somebody that's experienced in what they're doing and can advise you and help you understand how to utilize, and how to see yourself truly as the guinea pig. When you go to see your physician, it's not that he can magically see inside of you and understand your pain or where it's coming from. And so he listens to you, takes you through it. You go back in as a guinea pig and explain what the results were. So this is what we do, is we help people understand cannabis very clearly as a medicine, and to identify it as you've been taught with any other medicines. So I do think that, in terms of many of these, once again, is trying to break away the taboo and the concerns about it and get people to utilize these things.
It's amazing that, Weeds has a comment that says legal stores aren't allowed to give advice about strains. And that is a really good point. Yeah. That's a real problem.
That's a really big issue. Like with Relief, the medicinal cannabis dispensary that Randy and his daughter Tara are running. Those places are amongst the few, the compassion centers and whatnot, where they actually take the liberty to talk to people about cannabis. You can't find a physician to talk to you about it because they don't know. They've been fed a bunch of propaganda from pharmaceutical companies, and in their defense, they don't have the time to learn everything they need to learn about cannabis in order to prescribe it. And then, of course, they're all worried about being sued and losing their license. So that's where, raising awareness, shedding the taboos, and making it more acceptable will make it easier for people to understand. They'll have somewhere to go, someone they trust to go and talk to about it. It can be frightening, if you believe the propaganda and that you're gonna smoke a joint and you're gonna go nuts. It's really difficult to accept that drug, that substance could actually be beneficial.
Yeah, but you have to also remember that doctors are trained to use pharmaceuticals, and pills are done chemically. They're done by isolating different compounds, and they are not dealing with herbal medicine at all. And that's one of the big problems that medical doctors have, is they're not herbalists. They don't deal with herbs. They don't say take chamomile, have some, different teas. They don't do that at all. So when you ask them to prescribe marijuana, they are totally out of their comfort zone because they're dealing with a plant and not with something that tells you exactly how many milligrams of a certain substance you will have in terms of dosage, right?
Right.
And so they have isolated, now Setivex was done from marijuana. And that is, I believe, the only compound that exists right now. And that's the big push. That's part of the big research that will happen, is that the pharmaceutical industry is moving in, I'm certain, to isolate all of the aspects of cannabis that people find interesting, provide some kind of pain relief, and they will turn them into pills. And some people will take those pills rather than using the actual plant, like we do for almost everything else.
In the pharmaceutical industry, they're all single molecules. Every single tablet of Tylenol around the world is exactly the same. So you know exactly how to dose. There have been several synthetic cannabinoids made. Most of them have dropped off the market, and they're incredibly expensive. They're way more expensive than buying a gram of weed from a legal dispensary versus the street.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's something that the pharmaceutical industry would love to harness, but a hell of a lot more research has to happen. And one of the things that I realized from making the doc about cannabis being listed as a Schedule I narcotic is its biggest downfall. And until the United States take it off of Schedule I, we're not going to have as wide-scale studies done about it. If you want to study, because Schedule I are narcotics, drugs that have what the Americans deem as no medicinal value whatsoever. So heroin is listed as a Schedule I narcotic along with cannabis. But morphine is Schedule II. Morphine is a derivative of heroin. And opium, it goes on and on. And unless you can take it off the list, you can't do medicinal research to find out what its medicinal values are. So it's a closed loop, and it'll never change. Luckily in Canada, we're making change, and studies are happening. Israel is leading the charge in medicinal cannabis research. But one of the biggest stumbling blocks is the US. And hopefully the United Nations can put some pressure on them to not only legalize it, but remove it from Schedule I. And then we can start actually doing real research on it.
Nicole asked, since it's been legalized, will naturopaths discuss cannabis with their clients? I have no idea personally. I don't know, Randy. Do you have any?
Well,
Greg, do you have any thoughts on that?
In terms of medical access, it's been limited to physicians or nurse practitioners. So naturopaths have been kind of left out of that. They may have some knowledge. I'm not saying that they wouldn't have, but in terms of being a signing agent, in terms of getting your approval or your licensing through the government, so that you then can access medicinally or however through LPs, that has been the limiter. So it's not that they wouldn't wish to be a part of it, and it would be many that I've spoken with really welcome it, and there were many that previously, until the government really stepped in and decided that there was only 2 pathways, there were many that naturopaths and herbalists and Chinese medicine, and they were able to sign, but then that was limited a few years ago. So.
Yeah. Another huge misconception about medicinal cannabis is people have the misconception that it's a prescription to use medical cannabis, when it really is a license to buy medicinal cannabis from a legal producer. It's not a prescription in the sense of pharmaceutical that you would get from your doctor. They don't actually say, take 2 pills before breakfast on an empty stomach and you're going to get better. Doctors have virtually no knowledge about the use of cannabis, but unfortunately, like Randy just said, they're among the few who can license it. I bet you dollars to donuts that there are more naturopaths and herbalists and Chinese medical practitioners, even chiropractors in this country, that know more about the use of cannabis as medicine than all of the doctors in this country, or anywhere for that matter.
So I have a comment here from Wreath that says, I know many naturopaths that include cannabis in their therapies, actually, in Vancouver anyways.
Yeah, yeah, and it's becoming more widely accepted, but those naturopaths still cannot sign the first piece of paper that's required to allow you to get your license to buy. And that's one thing that I think we need to work on, because when I talk to people about what's going to happen to medicinal cannabis once we legalize social use, and there were two camps. One were adamant that we need to maintain a medicinal cannabis industry, and one who said, who needs it? We'll just go to our local dispensary. And part of the problem is, for those who use CBD for their medical needs, have a very difficult time finding that in the black market or the gray market or in the
legal rec
legal
market.
markets, because throughout history, people grew weed to get high. And especially in British Columbia and along the west coast of North America, they bred it to be more and more potent all the time. Nobody wanted CBD. That's only become a real marketable product since the legalization of medicinal use of cannabis in Canada. So it's difficult for people to get, and it's difficult for people to get advice.
So we've been at this for exactly 1 hour, and I don't have any more questions in my chat box, so this is last call, guys.
Wait, there's one. I went to the government pod star and said I wanted something for shingles pain. May want to balance THC and CBD. Yeah, the whole Shoppers Drug Mart question is interesting for me. I haven't read enough about it. Have you read anything about it, Randy? Are they simply going to be a dispensary, or
Yes.
or what will they be doing that's different from me ordering it from, Canopy or Aurora or any of the other places?
Yeah, nothing's been clarified in that. That's actually a very good question, because are they going to give any advice? Is there anything that will come through there? When you go in and you pick up most medications, the pharmacist will ask you a few questions. Do you ever use this product? So I'm not sure whether they're going to have that, or will they have support, and sort of in terms of, let's say, if you're diabetic, and if you go to a pharmacy, there are support sessions. You can go and you can learn how to test and how to use needles, and so there's all of that. There hasn't been anything brought forward in terms of working, counseling, advising people that are using medicinally. And as we were speaking earlier here, is that predominantly when you get into medical necessity, it's an older group. This group themselves may not have the experience that a younger group would have in terms of, cannabis and its effects, or, having a dealer, or God only knows what. So that's something that really does need to be looked into. This is where compassion centers, Relief, and others is that people can come in and they can get the information and support they would like, and the guidance right out of the gate of how am I going to feel with this, and how do we nurture people into this, and answer their questions. And that's something that Shoppers has not spoken of. Are they just going to be the place where you pick up your pills? Sure, if that's all they're going to do, well, I guess that's one entry point. But there is a need, though, to educate people on its use, to help people truly understand that it is a medicine, and to measure it as you would any medicine that you take. We're taught this from when we're very young, when you get a fever and your mom gives you an aspirin. Are you feeling any better? And we learn some level of self-reflection. Oh, am I feeling better? So it's all this goal orientation. And as I touched on earlier, that's very much a very big part of new members when they come in, is that level of education, helping them to really assess it and think about it. What are my goals? Is it my knees are sore, and are they feeling better? And those are very simple questions, but with cannabis use, it seems to get lost. It's like people want to ask, geez, am I getting high? Am I eating too much? Or, will my neighbors know? So there's all of these convoluted questions around it, rather than actually saying, is this helping me? Am I living a life of better quality?
Yeah.
Also educating people about, typically pharmacists, I think it's only been a decade or two where pharmacists would keep track of your prescriptions to look for drug-drug interactions. This happened with my own mother, who had a psychiatrist and an MD, and they were both, one was prescribing her an upper and one was prescribing her a downer. And the only person that was common was the pharmacist that knew that she was being prescribed both of those drugs. And with cannabis, it's not just a dosing issue, it's a strain issue, it's a cannabinoid issue, it's an edibles issue, and smoking versus oils and tinctures versus edibles. I had spoken with, I had interviewed some folks at Sweetgrass Prairie in Denver, who are an edibles bakery. And they were leaders in the Denver community anyways at making microdosed edibles. They were making, a regular kind of watermelon-sized ginger snap cookie or chocolate chip cookie, but they were also making tiny ones. And rather than selling something that was only 10 grams, they were selling stuff that was 2 grams, and getting people used to start low, go slow, and work your way up. And unless places like Shoppers Drug Mart are going to jump on board and start teaching their pharmacists this, or until pharmaceutical, what do you call a school that pharmacists go to?
Oh.
Anyways, until they start teaching pharmacists about it.
Can I touch on something there?
It's, you have something else?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay, and really what Greg is talking about, it's about delivery systems. And that's something that really does need to be looked at in terms of what will be available to the pharmacist? Will they have tinctures? Will they have edibles? Will they have oils? Will they have lozenges? And so should you vaporize? Maybe it's better that you smoke. And these are all different, what could be seen as delivery systems, how to utilize this in a medicinal fashion. And for one person, maybe taking a tincture is wonderful. They take a few drops 3 times a day. It's absolutely phenomenal. We've also seen, and this is what Greg was touching on earlier, is based upon sort of the very makeup, your chemical makeup. There can be these variances. That's why there is such a myriad of different pain relievers. One works phenomenal for one person, but doesn't work for another. And so these are why delivery systems are important to navigate your way through, and why you would need the guidance to look at it that way. Start with maybe taking drops and see if there's anything going on with that. Will that work for you? And then navigate your way around. And I'm not sure that shoppers will have not only the expertise in those areas, but whether they will have the variety of products to explore different delivery systems. My concern would be is that if somebody, a senior, is finally willing to break through the taboo and go try using cannabis, what if the delivery system is wrong for them and they walk away going, well, no, that didn't work, when in fact maybe it was the delivery system that was wrong. And we witness this regularly working with medicinally in terms of helping people. It's not just what it's not. You bet it's not one size fits all. And so that is something too, is that we'd have to look at. And apparently, until we can get much of that sorted out and help, see what shoppers is up against. But are they seeking advice? I don't know whether they're seeking advice from those that work within it or have worked within it. They seem to be taking a lot of sort of their steps forward from the ill-informed that are trying to operate these policies. So I wish them the best, because I do think that they've always traditionally been in a positive role. But I don't know whether they're going to have the tools or the expertise to move forward in that way.
No, I think that the medicinal community would be better served by welcoming Wreath, Vancouver Compassion Center, Montreal Compassion Centers. Those are the places that for decades have been in the trenches actually helping people. And they're being widely ignored or shut down, or in many cases just tolerated. But I think because of the bit of debacle that's happened with the legalization of recreational or social cannabis, I think we're still a ways off in recognizing the problems that we have in the medicinal world as well. Do you have anything else?
No,
Sylvie?
except everybody's been really kind and thanking us for having this session today. So they have been chatting away with everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Like, it's really fantastic. It means a lot to Greg and I that you came today, and that so many people have been viewing the documentary online. So thank you.
And we will keep it live. We'll send out links. I think we've sent links to everybody
And
on
we
how
will
to share it with your friends. If you haven't already included yourself on our mailing list, it'd be much appreciated, because it's a much easier way for us to let everybody know when we've got new content out there. I'm really looking forward to putting out some stuff about addictions. Spoke with Bruce Alexander. I want to touch the topics of edibles, psychoses,
cannabis cultivation.
We're looking down the road at doing some really interesting things, possibly with even Randy Kane on that subject. And I very much appreciate all the support that I've had from all the participants and the people in the cannabis community who really accepted me as a noob, as just a user. And I haven't been fighting this struggle for decades, like Randy and like Don and Carol and many of the other people that I've spoken with, and I really appreciate them accepting me and sharing their knowledge and helping make this a successful project. And I hope that you all share it and feel comfortable to start the conversation with those people around you who are still prohibitionists. You need to crack the conversation. It's not going to get any better. People aren't going to realize that this is not a scary plant. People have to have the conversation, and I look to you to help spread the word. So thanks for joining us, and I will be putting this up on our YouTube channel as soon as I can convert it and do that. All right, thank you everybody. We're signing off.
Thank you.
Oh, wait.
Oh, what?
There's Sylvie signing off.
Bye-bye.
Randy signing off.
Thanks so much. Absolutely fabulous.
Peace.